Yeah, this is my first talk like this, so thank you for being my guinea pigs. I think it's really cool that you started out with mindfulness in your class. I do that with all of my clients, 2 to 5 minutes just for us to get centered before we start therapy, and I think it's a really good practice. And obviously, as clinicians, for us to have a daily practice where we're getting centered, doing mind training, and learning how to observe with care, but not so attached to our ego judgment, I think is super important. So today I'm talking about, I think what Denise and I discussed is like LGBT issues, but specifically trans, gender variance, and then the intersection with issues related to people of color and non-white communities and such. So those are my 2 specializations. I'm a mindfulness psychologist, so I use like acceptance and commitment therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and other third wave CBT therapies. And then my populations that I serve are gender and sexual minorities, which LGBTQIAA, as well as poly, non-monogamy, kink, BDSM, and then also ethnic minorities. And this specialization has sort of emerged from my expertise, but also from the need for it in terms of what clients are seeking. And it's an interesting intersection when you have the 2 together, because that is a particular need where there's actually not that many. I would say that in my 20 years being here in the Bay Area, living in San Francisco, I've seen like gender and sexual diversity has remained stable and even increased, like in San Francisco. And I would say like trans visibility and acceptance has definitely increased, and gender variance, non-binary categorizations of gender definitely increased. But it's it's well documented that ethnic diversity is decreasing in the city due to economic forces, gentrification. New York Times just had a great article about the disappearing Black population in San Francisco, so this is a reality. And a number of my clients are queer people of color, and they're specifically seeking someone that they can identify with and has a shared reality with them. And it's particularly difficult because if you look at Gay Lesta and Very Open Minds, Gay Lesta has probably over 200 members, Very Open Minds about over 100 members.
What's the first Gay Lesta is?
Gay Lesta, they were thinking about a name change, but I don't think they've done it yet, and I don't think they will. But that's like the Bay Area LGBTQ therapists, basically. So it's the directory and networking group for therapists who do not identify as heterosexual, I guess. And it's an older organization. It's been around a while. It's got a nice, healthy membership. But if you actually go into their directory and you put in like Filipino therapist for San Francisco, I'm one of 2 people on there. So there's really not that much diversity. And I've seen that in the networking events as well. And then Bay Area Open Minds, which used to be Therapists Affirming Diversity and Sexuality, and then we did the name change. That was an organization that was formed by Keely Holmes. She formed it, I believe, in 2009 or 2010, after I interviewed her about her dissertation on BDSM and therapy and her experience with that from my own alienating experience in my graduate program, where there was some cultural assignment, and they told us to go to Folsom Street Fair to like look at the people, because you need to go look at a different culture to to write this paper. And so I felt alienated from almost the start of my program because of that. And I sought Keely out, knowing that she had done this dissertation in the 90s, and we talked. And when she had done her dissertation, it was so unknown, these alternative sexual practices, that she would get corrected. No, what you're talking about is domestic violence and things like that. So she said it was a very difficult struggle for her to get through the dissertation. And then when she heard my story, she was like, this is still happening, and this is like 2009, 2010. Let's do something about it. So that's when she got the idea to form Bay Area Open Minds. and it's been going strong. It has over 100 members now, and I think it's definitely an important organization. It's over and above like Gay Lesta, what They Are Open Minds it allies with is non-monogamy, polyamory, BDSM kink. So in addition to your sexual orientation, if you have alternative sexual practices, sometimes they're called non-vanilla, but people get offended by certain words, and it's really important. That was one of my points here. Is it's important to be aware of why people get offended by certain words, and not make assumptions, and also ask people, what words do they like to use to describe their practices and describe their identity. I think that's important. So I'm skipping around from what I wrote, but let me go back here. I would say the number one important thing, and this is in terms of any population, any specialization, is to make sure you're working within your competency, right? So what does that even mean? One of the big reasons why we formed Minorities Open Minds was the idea that people who have a kinky lifestyle or practice non-monogamy would go to a therapist, and the therapist would be like, wow, gee Liz, what's that? Please tell me more about that, I want to know. So then you spend your session of therapy that you paid for describing to the therapist, explaining to them, educating to them, what this is that you're doing. And obviously that's not really conducive to good therapy, and it's actually not a good practice as a therapist because you're not working within your competency at that point. So getting education, seeking consultation when you're not sure, right? It's always like, let's not think dichotomously, right? It's not a black and white issue, it's a fuzzy line, but there's always times when we may need to know more than we do, when we may need to, it's really about having healthy cultural humility is the way I think about it, right? And it's no matter what your identity is. Let me give you an example. So I had a young white trans client who had formerly been homeless, so a lot of hardship in her life, and then she'd gone through a great program where they did not only mindfulness but also critical thinking skills, which is like they should be teaching these everywhere. I think it's amazing. And she was telling me about how she had felt alienated and sort of rejected and shamed because she had gone to a queer person of POC, queer POC meeting, right? So, and I was a little curious about why she had gone, and she said, well, my family of origin is from an area of Europe that, is an ethnic area, and, so that's my ethnicity. So, what's your ethnicity? She said, Caucasian. So this is an interesting situation, right? I mean, if you're working with a client in a situation like that, and this is a new client, you're just building rapport with them, and then you have this sort of conversation. I mean, I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on like, what are you thinking about in terms of furthering a conversation, what's going through your head at that moment? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. Okay, you don't have to.
I'm not exactly sure, but can you describe the situation again?
So this is a young white trans woman who had formerly been homeless and now has a place to live and is going to school and is doing much better in life, right? And so they're networking out in the world, trying to get community and support, and they go to a queer persons of color meeting where they feel ostracized and told you don't belong here.
Oh, okay.
And so they're sharing that with me as their therapist. And so I'm processing this experience that they're having as they're sharing it with me. And of course, I'm in my mind, I'm going through, well, Caucasian isn't what people usually mean when they say a person of color, but so those are the thoughts going through my head, right? But in that moment, am I going to say that to the client? I'm like, what were you doing there? I mean, that's not empathic, right? That's not validating. This is the beginning of our rapport, and I want to create a safe space. Her identity, not her ethnic identity per se, but her identity as homeless, trans, formerly on the streets, during her teenage years, like going through that, she's obviously someone who's been on the fringes, who's been, ostracized by mainstream society in so many ways. So I don't believe it's my job at that point to point out to her, well, what you did isn't really, what they wanted or such thing, right? And so, we build rapport, I validate, and then later on in the relationship, we can have that conversation. And we can, once there's a sense of trust and safety that's been established and earned, then we can have a little, like it's a psychoeducation conversation, basically, or an education conversation. What do people mean when they say person of color? What does that usually mean? And I'm not getting on a soapbox and saying, well, you shouldn't have gone, but just explaining this is what people usually mean. And yes, of course, every ethnicity is an ethnicity, but that's just that's how it works because the dominant paradigm is Caucasian. So it's just the little nuances, right? When you're intersecting with various identities that have been oppressed within our system, how do you tease that out? How do you continue to work within the therapeutic relationship? So I just wanted to give that example. Let's see. Our identity as a therapist is important as well. I come from a mindfulness cognitive behavioral approach, but I'm not like strictly like that, but I know that the more psychodynamic approaches sometimes are really strict about you being sort of a blank wall or, a little bit, I would say almost paranoid about self-disclosure. And as a feminist psychologist, I really think that clinically relevant and well-timed self-disclosure is quite important in terms of establishing a sense of quality in the working relationship with the client. If I hold things back, the question should always be, are you holding things back because that's clinically the most appropriate thing, or is it a defense for yourself? And so to ask that, is it a leverage so that you can rest in your authority? Because for me, I actually, with my identifications, which come out in various ways in talking with the clients when appropriate, right? As pansexual, genderqueer, polyamorous, kink-identified individual, all of those things inform the way I see the world. In addition, I don't really adhere to, I believe traditional therapy sometimes can rest upon a sort of, definitely a patriarchal authoritarian stance in terms of how do you look at the client, right? And so I think it's important from a more feminist approach to see the equality there, for them to see this is an equal relationship, we're working together. And of course, the boundaries are important. We're modeling good boundaries. It's not about not modeling good boundaries. The worst thing I think one of the worst things you can do as a therapist is to model poor boundaries, to be too mentally invasive. You have to respect people's boundaries in any relationship, and I'm not sure how you can help if you don't do that. But so anyways, I think it's important that our identity informs how we work with the client, but we don't get on a soapbox, right? And we notice, we use our wise mind, right, or our intuition and our reason overlap. We notice when we sense something might be amiss. There's different ways we can sense it. Maybe we're getting on a soapbox, right? Like I'm talking a whole bunch to you guys now. If I went on and on and on like this in a therapy session, at some point I'm like, okay, wait a second, what am I doing here? Do I even see the person in front of me, or am I just like in my la-la land talking about things, right? So staying in the present moment, that's why mindfulness is so key, right? Here and now, what is arising in this moment? So noticing that and taking that, right? And, just all the different ways that we can get off track. Another one is resting in our authority, and, of course I know this, and that, and especially with, these communities that are not really seen and heard in the mainstream. For me to presume that I understand someone's experience from the inside when I don't, when that's not my identity, there is a temptation to do it because sometimes we feel helpless, sometimes we feel like we need to be the authority, but when you feel that temptation, it's really important to be aware of it. I have an African American client, and of course we've been talking a lot about racism. We've been processing microaggressions on public transportation here in the Bay Area, And then of course, when all these videos start coming out, the police shootings, and it just starts to feel so heavy, the things we're talking about. And I noticed after one session, I felt helpless, and I felt like I was trying so hard to say, yes, I understand where you're coming from. I used to investigate police brutality and this and that, you know, like pulling out these things about myself as if just to bolster my sense of like, I deserve to be here right now. And I realized my countertransference was, I don't know if I can help this client. Maybe as a non-African American, I can't really help this client. That was my feeling of helplessness. And so the next session, after we did our few minutes of mindfulness, I shared this countertransference. I said, you know, my countertransference last session was I felt helpless and I felt like maybe I can't help you, you know, not being an African American therapist. And I just want to let you know, I don't presume to understand your experience from the inside. And just that little bit of sharing, I felt it was very key. And she was thankful. She was grateful for that, and I think for the implied equality between us with that. And I'm not holding, when you hold something back in the therapeutic alliance with any client, but especially with clients who have trust issues because the larger society says that they're innately wrong or some such stupidity, right? When you hold that back, it's a barrier to the good work that you could be doing together, is what I believe. Let me just see what else I've written here. So yeah, and that comes down to authenticity, right?
So in that case, when you like express how helpless you feel and how you don't feel like you can really understand because you're not African American, like to what extent do you say, hey, would you like to address this with like an African American therapist?
Well, at that point, if she said, yeah, I think you're right, and maybe I just need to move on, or, or I need to explore that, you know, certainly I would be open to that because in my mind, it's always about serving the client's needs. You know, really karmically, I think that that's how it works. Once you start thinking, oh, you know, I'm going to lose this client and I need their business, I mean, it's not going to work. So but she may have in her mind, well, maybe I'm going to make some phone calls, but I'm not going to share with my therapist so I don't hurt her feelings. And that's fine too. I don't need to, I just bring up my observation, I meet whatever she brings back to me, and we go from there. I don't have an agenda beyond that, unless she brings one up herself, right? So we sort of we play it in the moment by, you know, what she's bringing out. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
So you don't actively suggest it, but then you could.
I mean, no, why would I actively suggest that unless there were more signs? Because that's just one sign, right? If there were several signs, yeah, I would, you know. The thing is that client came to me not just for the fact that I'm a therapist of color, and that's the point I was going to make, Bay Area therapists of color. How many people on the listserv? Like 80. So these gender and sexual diversity organizations have 100 to 200 members, and there's less than 100 in Bay Area therapists of color. And she specifically said, I sought you out because you're a person of color, you're a woman of color, and I'm the only African American in my entire tech company, and I don't want to go to white therapist, you know. And she also sought me out because of the non-monogamy piece, because she's interested in exploring that. So there's that intersection, right? So she could go to an African American therapist, but is there an African American therapist that also understands non-monogamy? Maybe there is, and maybe it would be a good fit. I hope one day there will be all these categories, right? This is what we need. Right now we don't have that still, which is sort of, I don't know, it surprises me. It does, especially in the Bay Area. But, you know, we can work towards that. So, yeah. Let's see, yeah, so the authenticity piece is really important. Looking for signs, like I said, is there anything you're ignoring or omitting, some aspect that you're aware of that you should be bringing into the equation? For instance, my last name, Valderrama, which obviously I don't pronounce with the rule of R's, is Spanish, right? But I'm not Spanish, I'm Filipino American, so I'm Filipino Caucasian, right? So, but I tend to get a lot of Latino clients and prospective clients and queer Latino clients because of that. In the beginning of my practice, I sort of had a sin of omission, right? I was like, well, I'm not going to disabuse them of the notion that I'm Latino. Because, hey, right? They're coming to see me. And if you Google my name, you'll see it says I'm Filipino American in several directories, right? So I thought, okay, I don't need to have that discussion. And when I would start to think about the discussion I would have, it just made me uncomfortable. Say, well, I'm not actually Latino, even though you've applied by the fact that you're coming to me and you say you want, to seek out a shared reality with your therapist. You're implying that you think we share ethnicity. And the reality is I'm Filipino American. I grew up in Echo Park in the 70s and 80s, a predominantly Mexican American neighborhood. I've spent months in Central America living and learning Spanish. And at this point for many years now, I have family members via marriage who are Latino, right? So that's the reality of my connection with the Latino community, right? When I would think about saying that to these clients, oh, that's just so much to say, and it sounds like I'm trying to justify myself, and let me just leave it alone. So, not surprisingly, I lost those clients. They didn't stay with me, because that's in the way, right? That's in the room. And I even feel like I detected at one point when one client must have Googled me and discovered that I wasn't. Because all of a sudden she started talking about my culture instead of our culture, right? So it matters. It matters that we represent ourselves accurately, that we self-disclose in a way that helps the therapy, right? Because I think sometimes that don't self-disclose can get sort of in the way, right? I mean, I could give a counterexample, like when in my training, I had a Latina client who absolutely hated Asians. She hated them. And she would tell me how much she hated them, especially Filipinos. And I never did get around to, self-disclosing with her, especially because of her diagnosis. It was pretty severe. I didn't feel it was appropriate. So, once again, let's not think too dichotomously. It's really case by case. It's really like what's serving this client in this moment, and what's clinically appropriate. So we're always sort of assessing that. We can't really use a manual, in that way. We have to really see what's right in front of us.
What were you afraid of if you did disclose that you were part Filipino? And what if, so say she found out herself, Googling you?
Yeah.
In what way were you afraid of? What kind of repercussions would you have?
I wasn't afraid of anything really. It was more this client was a pretty low functioning client with a severe mental disorder. I didn't think she was the kind of person that would Google me, so I didn't think she would ever really find out. So it was more a sense of just from her history with having schisms in her rapport with previous clinicians at the agency. I felt that the one way to maintain it would be to continue on, with that assumption in place. So, but I mean, it's really case by case. If all of those factors I just described to you weren't present, I might have made a different decision there. So it's really, and then you're getting consultation, right? At that point, I would have a supervisor to discuss it with and such. And then if you're on your own, you're getting consultation on it as well. So yeah, you sort of, like I said, it's case by case. So let's see. Give me a second while I look through this. I would also say there's a lot. What I discovered is that along with these identifications of gender and sexual minorities, there's often, in my experience, other alternative identities, especially, if you're kink identified or poly identified, a lot of times the people are also not identifying with other mainstream things. So maybe they're pagan, or maybe they're in the furry community, or maybe they identify as anarchist and feminist, which isn't even, it's becoming more mainstream, which is good.
Can you just say what furry is?
The furry community is people who enjoy dressing up in costumes like they're furry animals and such. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual. Many of them don't consider it a fetish. It's sort of just a community identification. It can be virtual, it can be real life. So yeah, that's great. So there's different, I found that like once you get into these intersections and serving these underserved communities, that you're going to find, I just love how it just brings all these alternative perspectives into play, and that's really informed my experience as a therapist. I look at therapy as a two-way process, a two-way learning experience. Obviously, we're bringing our expertise and our knowledge and how we hold the frame and all that good stuff. But of course, it's a parallel process of learning for us, and so and it's enriching in that way. And I think it's empowering for the client when they realize that that's happening as well. So not holding back and just sort of resting in, on Dr. So-and-so or what have you, that you're bringing that to the table. And I think especially for communities and individuals who have not felt respected or recognized even their right to live, right? I mean, it's amazing that in 2016 we're still talking about these things in the United States, but it's true, right? And it's a very scary time in some ways. So for us to create a sense of safety and validation is pretty important. I've had some trans clients come to me and say, my last client, my last therapist, I didn't feel really saw me, and I wonder if they had LGBT and they just added a T, to get some extra business, because when I was there, I really didn't feel seen and I didn't feel understood, and I felt that they weren't comfortable with me. And so if you're having those feelings, I believe it's very likely the client knows you're having those feelings. So it's really important for us to be conscious of what our countertransference is and what our comfort level is, what our confidence level is, and like working with that, because that's what they need. It's like that reparative work you do when someone's had a therapist that wasn't affirming for them is, that's important work. And when your identity might have caused you to be disowned by your family and other things that are pretty extreme, in terms of how someone can have their support system in the world, and then to go to a therapist who, claims to understand or says that they, are aware or ally, but then doesn't actually have that presence in the room, right? I mean, it's better to just say, I treat gay men, or I treat lesbians, right? You don't have to say the whole LGBTQIA, right? I mean, let's be specific about what it is, right? And then just like we would for any client, how do you like to be addressed? You're going to ask trans clients, what pronoun do you like to use? You want to ask these terms because they're important, Like I was talking about words and how they're important in BDSM and kink. Some people talk about slaves. Other people are like completely triggered by that word, right? For good reason. So it's really important to be aware of what sort of wording does each individual person like to use, right? I mean, those are just some of the things off the top of my head. Let me see if I have any more. No, I think that's it. And just being an advocate, you can't help but be an advocate, I think, once you start, doing good work with your clients, and then also if you're, you're in the community as well. You can't help it. And I guess one of the things to also be aware of, and this is a discussion I see on listservs and also a discussion I had with my clients, is if you are in the same communities, you might run into each other. So having those conversations as well. If I run into you at Pride, if I run into you at a play party, I'm not going to acknowledge you because I respect your confidentiality. That's my legal, that's what I have to do. So if you say hello to me, that's your prerogative. But I'm not going to, that's not what I'm supposed to do. So to have that conversation, is important. But in terms of the advocacy, I had an experience recently where I was renting from a space, and another renter made a sort of transphobic comment about one of my clients to me. And, you just get protective about your clients. And, it just coming out of an intense session where we had done such work, and then to have, this person be like, your client is too loud, and, even the noise counselors, they're just so loud. He's so loud, and they were actually being inappropriate trying to ask me about this client in a way that, confidentiality, I certainly can't talk with them about, and neither did I want to. And then finally I was like, well, this other person says, oh, that's interesting, I went and took the step of, contacting the group that we rent from, and just to let them know, this encounter happened, it was a little off, and I just want to let you know, because, and they were like, we want everyone to feel welcome and safe, and, we respect the diversity of clientele, and, we're sorry that happened to you. So I think it's important, that we walk the walk as well. So that's my talk. Do you guys have questions?
We do have questions, but I think I need to sit on that a little bit.
Okay, well, you have my card. You can email me a question.
I have a question. What can clinicians do if internally there's some transphobia, and how to deal with that, and how to be most present with clients?
Yeah. I think transphobia is everyone, just like everyone has, racism inside them and other conditioning. We all have that internalized. Even those of us who feel gender variant, we're going to have that phobia. So the first piece is really acknowledging it, right? And holding that with a lot of self-compassion. All the great studies about how good self-compassion is. So really just holding that gently with acceptance. And when I say acceptance, I don't mean, excusing. It's a different quality, right? But just seeing it instead of running away from it, fighting that reality, saying it doesn't exist, trying to repress it, right? That's the unhealthy way to do it. So we see it for what it is, we explore it. I recommend exploring it, not just intellectually, but sort of experientially, like, what is the sensation in my body when I think about this? Do certain memories come up? What associations do I have with this? And then just sort of teasing that thread, right? And from there, getting more education. And not just like by reading something, but talking to someone, having those conversations. Because people, it's once you start reaching out and trying to have conversations with different individuals in a way that you're bringing that intention, that healthy cultural humility within the intention, you're going to be met in a good way. And so I would say that's probably a good start to how to deal with that.
So you mentioned that clients come to you because of a shared reality, and I assume that many of them might ask you about how you would deal with certain situations, or do they not?
No, not really. Yeah, that's not really, no, I don't think that's not a usual question. And I think it's partly, maybe, this is my guess, is when you have a stance where you're not advice giving, then people aren't going to ask that question. So it's, because the relationship is different, and it's like this empathic relationship, and if I have a suggestion, I'm not going to couch it in, this is the way I would do it, right? Because then that's resting on that authority that I talked about that I think is sort of detrimental to good therapy. It's more like you can present it as, something like that happened in my life and this is what I did. So then you're sort of just presenting it as like a case study almost, right? And then that's different from saying, you should do this, right? Because everyone's identity is different and path is different.
And when do you feel like, are there times where you felt like you were requested more
here I'm guessing again, because I haven't thought about this too much, but I think when you have established good rapport, good boundaries, good presence in the room, and set the intention that this is the work that I'm doing with the client is on them, is about them, right? Then it's not so much about the therapist, so it's not. I haven't had a client say, tell me about this. I mean, the closest thing I've had recently, but it wasn't, I'll just give you an example that strikes me, is I had a client who asked me what my pronoun is. And it sort of threw me off, because I'm like, well, my pronoun is she, is her, you know, I identify as woman. But it was this weird thing where I was like, well, that's not totally true, but just, I mean, I'm genderqueer, but like, I still, if you have to do the classifications, I still will go with the female, right? So I did a lot of stuff in my head at that point. And I've been thinking about it since, but I don't know if I'm going to have a follow-up conversation with that client about my thoughts that she sort of triggered, right? So that's sort of an example I would give. But my clients aren't asking me, you know, like, what do you do? What are you doing tonight? Or, you know, what are you doing tomorrow? I think when you establish good boundaries in the beginning, then they know where they are. And that's for them too. I mean, that's especially for them, right? When we hold certain boundaries. And people, when therapists get lazy with boundaries and they're like, oh, I'm going to go grocery shopping. I mean, that's not even a good example. But you know what I mean? It's like, when you get sort of like, remember that in the therapy room, the conversation should be different from an everyday conversation. That's the sort of thing that they can have with their friends, with anyone, right? How is it different? We talk about the frame. We talk about what we've noticed that in polite conversation you don't say, well, I noticed you shifted there, and I'm wondering if you're having some incongruence between, you know, your emotions and, you know, your thoughts. You know, I mean, you know, right? We don't say those sort of things. So how do you make it different from a normal conversation, right? And so it doesn't really come up too much. And maybe that's a fear that you have, that they're going to be digging in, right? So like noticing that and noticing what is that about, that fear, because it's true. When I first thought about doing this specialization, sort of coming out as a psychologist in these different ways, there was a lot of fear, because they put fear in grad school, and they want you to sort of be cookie cutter, right? And I was afraid, even my partner was afraid, like, oh, you're going to get like weird, heavy breathing calls and this sort of thing. It's pretty rare, but on the occasions I do get it, it's like a test, you know. Oh, I'll PayPal you some money right now, and I want to talk about my fetish, you know. I found you on Kink-aware Professionals. And sort of like, okay, is this clinically appropriate? Or is this a phone sex call, right? And I have to make that judgment call, and I think ethically it matters. It matters, you know, what I decide. So.
Thank you.
Thanks.